So Guillaume, first off, nice to see you. It's been a while. I'm really happy that you took the time today to have this conversation. I know we're going to riff like on a million different subjects and to catch up. I feel it'll be more like a catch up than an interview. But maybe I'll take the opportunity to ask you questions I've never asked you in person, right? I guess the first question is, when did you start considering yourself an entrepreneur? At what point in your journey did you say, hey, I think I'm kind of doing this thing?
So the glorious answer would probably be when I was selling lemonade when I was like 5 or 6 years old. But in all honesty, I think it's when I did my first big gig running a painting franchise called College Pro Painters while I was doing university. You end up managing a full P&L, and a six-digit P&L, and when you're 19 years old, it's pretty serious. So I would say when I was 19, I fell in love with entrepreneurship, and that's when I also decided to apply to HEC Montreal and do the management entrepreneurship program.
Yeah, so the famous story from what I recall is you finished that program and you went to launch NVI, which was and is to this day under a new name, the quintessential digital marketing agency of the country. Maybe give us a little bit of that inception story of NVI for the audience that maybe hasn't heard it.
Yeah, so two fun facts. One, when I had the idea about the NVI, it was literally a bad idea. It was launching a web design firm in 2004, which we already had 100 too many in Montreal. But for a year, we kind of tried to make very cheap websites. But the fun fact is, then I went to my last class of HEC and I found out a guy named Jean-François Renaud, who at the time was running Adviso, which is also one of the big powerhouse in digital marketing still to this day, and fell in love with digital marketing, less so building websites. And that's when I would say that the business really took off. We decided it went from 6 to 18 people in a year, right after we found out digital marketing. And yeah, I think that's how the whole thing got started. We were very passionate about algorithms, especially SEO at the time, and became the largest agency of SEO, and then started to do paid search analytics. And then we got acquired by Dentsu Aegis Network, one of the big six. I think we actually met together when you were still at Google. So yeah, it was a lot of fun times to achieve that. And I stayed 5 years in the. I had a 5 year earnout at Dentsu.
Yeah, I think we met before then. Actually, I was still a media expert, by the way. So it's been a while since we
First time
met.
we did business, I think, was at Google.
That's
But at
right. That's right.
Media
You're
Expire, we
officially,
knew
yeah,
each
you're
other. You're right.
quasi competitors, but not really considering the space. But yeah, it was more. You guys were my customer. You guys were spending a lot on paid search, right? Um,
Yeah.
so obviously, the story I think is a success story with where I prospect, where I went. You've been also very vocal in terms of some of the numbers of growth that you achieved post exit, which is pretty rare. Right? Most entrepreneurs don't stick around for that long after an exit. You stuck around, grew the business, tripled it. Yeah, I guess my question would be is maybe your biggest takeaway, your biggest lesson learned from that journey, from selling the business to the exit.
Yeah. So I think you need to sell your business because you believe in a dream, and selling it doesn't necessarily, and you want to accomplish it. You want that purpose of that business to go and get at it. When we were around 50 people, we were, let's say, the one or two biggest guys in Montreal. We were starting to make some noise in Toronto. We were at a point where to bid on the largest bids and to make sure that our business was going to become the largest digital performance agency in the country, we had to be part of a larger group. Uh, there, you could not bid on, let's say, a digital campaign without bidding on the traditional campaign for the largest accounts, like the Target, Microsoft of this world. So quickly, I had two things in my head. Like half of my head was the shareholder saying, you've worked really hard, 7, 8 years, the business is in great shape. Uh, Maybe it's time to crystallize some of that money. And at the same time, the CEO was saying, hey man, we're an independent company. We're incapable of pushing further unless we join a larger group if our goal is to be serving the largest Canadian customers. So it was a bit of a combination of that conversation that happened in my head that I took together and said, okay, I think maybe it's time to sell. But we were not necessarily at a time where it made sense from an investment standpoint, for a shareholder standpoint, to sell because their business was fairly small. It was a 5 million revenue type of business. So that's why I took a much longer earnout than I anticipated. My learning was that I still believed and wanted to be the biggest guys in the country. So I didn't care to stick around for a long period of time. Actually, even at the end of that earnout, I was willing to stick around for a few more years. We just didn't agree on what the terms would be to move forward on this. But and I have no animosity regarding that whatsoever. I think I really enjoyed the time that I spent understanding how a big network worked. But yeah, I think the main learning is my purpose was we wanted to be the best in SEO in Canada and then the best at managing digital marketing in Canada. And being part of a large network was just a means to an end. We tried to stay true to ourselves and our target and make sure that we would deliver on our own promise. So I think we achieved that at the very end of the earnout, and then things went differently. But yeah, the journey for us was to take a business from scratch and become the largest guys operating the largest budgets in paid and earned media. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna circle back to paid well digital marketing in generally. It's a subject that I'm still a little bit far away from today, but still have an interest in, and maybe I'll poke you a little bit after on it. I want to go back to that. The now you've left obviously Dentsu, so since that time you've started something called Contxtful. So just curious as to the inception story. And why deciding to start another startup? Like, I guess you had a few scars along the NVI/iProspect days. So curious what drove you to want to take the entrepreneurial journey again.
Yeah, so when I left iProspect, I told myself I would never work in the advertising industry again. And I think 2 months later, I was already discussing something around that. What really created that whole thing is I always cherished the idea of building a global product. I had achieved, let's say, building a nice national service business, but wanted to try something new, not just redo another agency. I wanted to try something net new. So that was one point that I told myself leaving the agency world what I wanted to do. And by accident, a friend of mine asked me to to meet up a deep tech incubator called Tandem Launch, which has a lot of IP and a very nice technology transfer office and a nice, let's say, playground to develop things. And I found two guys there, and I fell in love with the tech that they were building. It was a tech that was coming from the physics world, and I thought right away how we could apply it to make advertising a better world. So I kind of felt like going back in the same channel I was before, but taking more of an ethical stance and trying to build something that would be, I don't want to say better, but very different than the GAFA mindset. I think that's what inspired me to go. I think I will always be an entrepreneur. I will always launch projects. I saw this opportunity to take 5 years of R&D and fast track it into one. And also personally, with my purpose, I didn't want to just sell ads. So now the what we work on, and I guess we'll get to that later, but it's really something that is driven by purpose. We're trying to reduce digital waste, and we're trying to do that without using any private data. And I think to me, it speaks a lot to what we can bring to the ecosystem. Like I played with the big guys buying a lot of money and pushing the GAFA all over the place. But today I'm in a different place where I feel that we need to create more of an equilibrium. And I think if I can be part of the people that are more in the clean ad tech world, I think I'm happy on that front. And the global challenge for a product is quite daunting as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a question of timing as well. Like you mentioned, this notion of negative externalities, right? I think people now are really starting to realize that the attention economy, the what it's causing in terms of result, right? Like from, let's say, documentaries on Netflix to just an increase in depression rates, etc., caused by our dopamine filled patterns, right? And a lot of this is filled by the money coming in, right? Like you said, the advertising. And I have to say, I've also been on that side of the fence, right, for many years. Um, Beyond the ethical stance, maybe
Yeah.
talk to you about the business idea itself. So maybe what is Contxtful? How are you guys tackling this challenge that today seems almost unrealistic, right? Like,
Yeah. So I think the whole idea, what our goal and our purpose is to become the best in the world at interpreting data coming from sensors found in mobile devices. but we only want to do it with leveraging sensors that do not generate private data. So no camera, no GPS, no microphone. We're mainly using the gyroscope, the accelerometer, the linear accelerometer, magnetometer, ambient light, speaker, not with voices, but just to understand the loudness in an environment. The whole idea is we want to be the best in the world to take these raw data sets. We created a context engine, a human context engine that allows to interpret that data and try to build segments, try to build data sets, first-party data sets that are harmless to the consumer, but can still generate some, let's say, marketing purposes or segmentation purposes of sorts. So the idea was really trying to say a little bit like the electric car, where you could not use gas to produce your car. We said, okay, we're going to build a technology that can only leverage data that is non-private, then that cannot do fingerprinting, and that if it's, let's say, hacked, it cannot cause any harm. And that's the clean slate that we started with. So that's very challenging because it's much easier for you, for a GPS point, to follow you wherever you go, to describe and derive, let's say, some of your behaviors. But it's much more dangerous than using the type of technology that we do. So we wanted to bring a breath of fresh air, let's say, in that mindset. And the first industry that we attacked is the attention economy. We built a new signal that we call the receptivity, and it allows to know in real time, just before you sell the impression and just after it was served, if there's really a human being that's holding the device and is highly engaged with the device. And all of that is done without any, let's say, identification of any kind. So that's really one of our key features. Like, yes, it can be action in real time, but it's living on non-private data set, and we're really happy about that play. And it's a big thing when we do interviews. We want people to be motivated by something like this. That purpose is very strong.
Yeah, yeah, no, it seems it's a very interesting, different approach. Obviously, like you mentioned, like, against the Googles and the Facebooks. Maybe explain what is a receptivity score and how you use that to score, let's say, potential impressions that like advertisers
Yeah.
would bid on.
So the whole idea starts with, we have a context engine that we spent a couple millions and a couple thousand hours to build. And what we do is we pretty much understand in real time human behaviors. So receptivity is built out of 4 initial proprietary machine learning modules. The first one is movement. So in Hertz is the phone moving at a speed that the eye is able to read on the screen. So that's signature number 1. Signature number 2 is, are you standing up, sitting, or laying down, which has a big impact into your type of receptiveness you could have towards content or ads. The third one is the device held in a hand or on a rack or on the table or face down, which impacts a lot if the eye can see. And the last one is with your physiognomy and the way you're holding a device. Are you looking at it right now? Am I like this, or I'm like this, for example, because I'm waiting for an ad to finish? All of these 4 modules, we measure them pretty much at the same time that someone hits a site and advertising is about to be served. We take a little time series of half a second, and we're able to understand all of these signals and create a signature, a final signature, which is, are you receptive or not to your device right now, without knowing who you are. But we know that the human, the third dimension with the device, is what we bring. I think a lot of the stuff that exists in the world are checking if, let's say, an ad was served. They're checking if an ad is visible on the screen, but nobody's thinking about the human that's behind the device. And in the mobility world, we believe that this should be the primary metric, like knowing not who, but knowing what is behind the device, and is it in an environment that's ideal to push some ads. So I think that's the whole logic of the business. We have a measurement tool and a monetization tool that we sell to the buy side and the sell side.
Yeah, and how do you work with publishers? Do you just insert and like do header bidding so they can like allow them to like bid on specific impressions, or how does it work?
We enable publishers and SSPs by allowing the signal to run directly on the sites. And then publishers and SSPs can create deal IDs that can go in direct or PMPs and things like that, and allows to buy receptive versus non-receptive impressions. And we've seen great, I'm touching wood, but we've seen great results. So far, the product was launched in Q3 of this year, that product. And so far, the business cases are really interesting because we kind of get rid of 30-40% of the programmatic traffic that usually yields nothing. So it's the big feature is along that, and we cannot cheat these sensors because it's collected straight from your own device live. So it's not something that a computer can easily cheat, because now it's easy to scroll with a computer, it's easy to click on in banners, it's easy to cheat viewability with smaller formats, but trying to cheat our API that's fetching hardware at the source, this is not happening.
Yeah.
So it's a very cool signal to ensure you really have a qualified pair of eyeballs in front of you.
Yeah. Have you thought about how what happens if people try to cheat? If some people try and take your receptivity data and combine it with like first party data, kind of going against your ethical stance of no private data. How do you think about that?
So notionally, I'll give the example of hybrid cars. I'm totally aware that we're not going to be able to convince a publisher and an advertiser tomorrow to stop using any private data of sorts. What we're trying to do in the market is contaminate it in a positive way to say, hey, by the way, you can use this instead of that to get to the same results, and you won't have any, let's say, privacy risk with it. So we're trying to influence and publishers so that in their whole bucket of data, more and more of it comes from non-private data sets versus private ones. And the second point is, if they do combine it with existing private data that they own, they have the responsibility themselves to make sure that they got the authorization to do so. And we will not fire that data unless we do our own diligence around that, because we would lose our, well, we don't want to get in trouble for anything, but we also want to make sure that it's not serving uh, other kinds of purposes. But yeah, I mean, this has been an interesting chat internally at in the business. But so far, I mean, the industry and the whole groups of people we're talking to, they're reacting very positively, especially the advertisers who are looking for ways not to use the GAFA type of data sets with everything that's being heard and all the privacy issues we've saw in the last couple of years. So I think it's the right timing for sure to push that kind of innovation.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And where are you in terms of your go-to-market today? Are you going to allow people to just self-serve, take your tools, or do you have to build out and invest in a sales force? So, curious as to how you're going to achieve your goals.
I see three big layers of deployment because our goal, and that's a bit swinging for the fences, but we want receptivity to become the norm, like viewability was the norm for, let's say, analyzing that data 10 years ago. So we want receptivity to be used across the planet. So for sure, the last part is we need to democratize it to a point where we're not the only ones selling it and everyone can use it. So the three stages for us was, stage one is, let's make sure receptivity matters and that it works everywhere. It works in videos, it works in display, it works in native ads and outstream, and that we're really able to have all the connectors necessary and all the business cases piling up to say this has some legs. This is phase one. I think we're probably at the end of that phase, meaning we still have a lot of connectors to build and whatnot, but we're stacking good results on A/B testing if it's working or not. So second stage is this whole scaling. So scaling will be, can we get integrated into the 18 biggest SSPs? Can we do partnerships with large DSPs as well so that this can scale globally? And I would say the last step, our wish would be that we democratize it so everyone is able to use it with some sort of API, like not free access, but self-serve access API, and that some businesses could build some value out of it. Because now our first signal from Contxtful is that whole receptivity, but we'll be working on other families of that first one is attacking the attention economy, but we're building also a second family called rituals, which will try to understand more life hygiene moments, transportation habits, things that are part of our daily lives, but are more general behaviors that we recognize all over the world. So are people, let's say, more transit users? Are people more early risers? Things like that. But again, where the job is never to use any private data and not collect it at the one-on-one mechanism. It's always to create segments. So it's always engineered so that there's no one-to-one type of risk, and that data can be the same for a lot of humans. The way you hold the phone to take a selfie, probably very similar for 6 billion people. So that's the kind of data sets that we build. It's a device held in hand. It's all that logic, but most people will hold their device in a fairly similar way. So there's no way I can tell that it's you or me. We even did tests around the table where two people would hold devices. You were trying to tell based on the data coming in which one it was, and was no way to tell. So it's pretty cool for that. For that concept is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I love the concept also of contaminating the industry, but positively. Do you ever
Yeah.
envision maybe working with like a Google and Facebook if they come calling? Like obviously, it'd be. I think there's big questions to ask because you can be, really drive change, but at the same time, do you want to accept money from, the quote unquote devil? But
So a couple things. Google in our field, they're mainly, if I cut YouTube, they're mainly a tech vendor for the ecosystem of programmatic. Um, Facebook, they have their own, it's a publisher notionally. So these guys, I would say, we took a stance not to sell our product to the GAFA. And we took a stance as doesn't mean we don't collaborate. We're running our stuff on, let's say, Google Cloud. We're working with Amazon Mechanical Turks to do some training. So we are using the GAFA, but less so from an advertising standpoint, more so for the other elements they have in their business. But we decided to offer a solution only to the non-GAFA. So we're not going to show up in Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but we want to show up. We want to give an edge to publishers and also some of our competitors like the Moat, IAS, and DV of this world. They are not creating any competitive advantage for the publishers because they're pretty much served everywhere, including YouTube and whatnot. So we took the decision to work with the other half of the industry, but to make sure that we are a differentiator both for the publisher, SSP, and the DSP and advertisers without necessarily ditching the GAFA, but we don't want to work with them. Our play is really to create some equilibrium. So, and that's also why it didn't make sense to use private data because we felt we would be yet another tool that's collecting more and more data that shouldn't be collected if we don't need it. The fact I can tell you that you're looking at your device means you don't need the camera to do that, and you don't need to record my face to do that. So that's a simple example, but I think that's how we should be thinking as an industry. And now I think we're stuck with a lot of the legacy, trying to preserve our cookies. I think that's not necessarily the logic that we should be. We need a disruption, and it's not by trying to to keep grabbing, let's say what's still there that will get there. We need
yeah,
to turn the page and start over.
yeah, it makes sense. And it makes sense that you do integrate with like a double click, I imagine, because you would allow publishers to like piggyback on their existing tech stack, but
Yeah.
not use it like you said directly on a YouTube,
We're
etc.
Google AdX certified, it made sense, but I'm an analytics partner. I'm not running advertising per se, and we're not running media, and we're not selling media. We're really in the middle, trying to be a catalyst between all of these independents.
Yeah. Maybe a last question about Contextful is like sense of scale, where you at today with the business, like some milestones that you're looking to achieve in the short term.
Yeah, yeah. We launched our first product in Q1. We had a lot of sales that got delayed. The measurement product that was the first launch. The second product, which is more the monetization one with the publishers, which we were talking earlier, is was launched in Q3. We're a team of 15 people. It's been in R&D in 2017, 18, and 19, and launched this product in 2020. We've secured roughly 2.5 million of financing Canadian so far, and we are raising another round right now that should close in a couple of weeks before Christmas of another 2.5 million. So we'll be at a total raised capital of 5 by the end of the year. We have 2 years in front of us to break the ceiling, which is to me making at least 100K MRR with one of our two products, and hopefully two of them break the 100K ceiling. And we hope to achieve that hopefully next year, worst case within the next two. And we'll be scaling up to maybe 20, 25 people during the course of these 2 years if progress keeps pushing. Now we have, let's say, 4, 5, 6 active MR clients, and we're deploying massively with larger players in the Canadian ecosystem. And we started to get our first US and Europe pilots that are going live or are live in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. It's cool to see you go again and like try and knock it out of the park. So I really like the ambition, like you mentioned, like swing for the fences, man. Like why not?
Yeah, we
um,
want to be the Kleenex of or the Frigidaire of the. That's why we want receptivity not just to be owned by us. Now it is because we need to make sure it's clear, it's understandable. But once it get the massive reach, we want to find a way to democratize it. A little bit like Elon Musk decided to open all of its patents for the greater good. We need to find a commercial angle to that, but we that's one of our goals is we want to make sure that this can become a standard in the
yeah,
industry.
you mentioned one of the key trends, and maybe to zoom out, talk about some of the trends that you see are important. You mentioned right this notion of user privacy that's becoming much more prevalent. I want to say in the next few years. What do you think is another trend that's happening in the space that's maybe not as widely understood yet? That's still like below the surface.
I think it's identity. There is a quest right now as a plan B, let's say, or plan A for the cookies, third-party cookies going away, which is, and that's a bit of a double-edged sword. I'm a little bit not skeptical, but a little bit cautious about this. A lot of the industry is pushing towards really understanding who you are, like a real identity, but much more protected. Uh, I like the concept, but it's a little bit like if the government or the insurers have a copy of your medical report from your doctor. Sometimes there could be some sort of a conflict of interest. So I want this to be a great thing where we remove a lot of spam, a lot of fraud because we know who we're talking to. There's more walled garden, and now you have some sort of a trusted place where people can navigate between all of these walled garden, and we can follow the person, not necessarily fingerprint the person, but really she declared or he declared that he was willing to be followed and identify as the person. But I'm a little bit cautious to see how that won't lead to how the industry has been running for the last 15, 20 years, which is the wild west. I mean, this is the part I mean, in theory, it makes sense. The reality, I'm skeptical. The guys at Optable in Montreal are trying to work a lot towards that, and they're the right kind of guys to try to build and fix that ecosystem. But it's a bit scary at the same time.
Yeah, I was going to say there's still so many. How should I say? It's still fluid in terms of like the industry movement, and most people don't understand the impact. Even most people, I want to say in the digital ad industry, right? Like,
Oh
uh,
yeah, no, the agencies and what I mean, the reality is that nobody really understands the internet. Internet is a big piece of duct tape all over the place and it's leaking data all over the place as well. And it's always been like this. So trying to think that we'll build a bulletproof solution is an interesting challenge, but I mean, it's we need to be cautious to make sure that the identities don't leak like they leak with Equifax
yeah,
and other large group that made it a little bit more dangerous than it was before these leaks. So,
yeah. Well, what are you most optimistic about? Maybe on the converse side.
well, I think there's a real movement, like a ground movement. I don't know how to say that, but a large movement of people willing to do better. I think it's driven a bit by consumers, but it's driven a lot by creating something that will work for the future, being for future proofing your business. There's a lot more people thinking like that. The fly by nights seems to be going away more. So I'm happy because I think we came to our senses. Now the problem is that we've lived for so long. It's like being dependent on oil. I think now there's a real movement towards electricity, but still there's some roadblocks that we need to overcome. But I think the majority of people want to see the electric car win. I think the majority of the industry, ad tech, wants to rebuild some of its glory. But I think it's going to go through a lot of stuff that's create less problems and less risk than what we're currently dealing with. The fact that a lot of these companies are filming us, listening to us. I mean that cannot, let's say, withstand time. I think in the future, not in all situations. There should be it should be more regulated in general. So it's tough that corporations are larger than countries now. That's something we need to fight for sure. But I think there's a real will to make the industry better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with your points.
Probably that a lot of people like me feel cheap of having spent so much money with private data that now they feel they need to give back in a different way. But that's the feeling I got from talking with a lot of the guys that are running a second or a third time in NatTech or MarTech. So I'm happy to exchange with these guys to try to make the world a better place.
Yeah, yeah, no, I could definitely, like I said, relate. And what I find interesting is that you're not just sitting back. You are trying something, which is relatively rare in my experience, and it's also driven by purpose, right? I want to go back and riff a little bit on what you mentioned in terms of how we're going to change, right? So you mentioned this notion of regulation. I think it's going to vary country by country. What do you see as one of the key factors for it to happen? Like for instance, on my end, I believe a lot of it has to come from startups and entrepreneurship. Like it's going to be solved with more technology, not less technology. So, we're just curious as to how you see any potential solutions and the changes in the market occurring.
But I think we need to change the game. Say so. I think the solutions that are going to thrive are the ones that are just going to say, okay, this is done. We forget about it and we start from scratch. So, and I agree with you that it's going to come with startups. It's going to come. I'll give a comparison. Maybe it looks stupid, but the whole Pfizer story now with the C19 vaccine. Bottom line, it's a small place with say a couple of guys, a guy and girl, are crazy about working on a new tech that takes forever to regulate, and now the world's gonna burn. So now we're gonna fast track the regulation, and yes, there might be some risk, but the rewards are gonna pay off more. I think we need as an industry to get into that mindset. Like what we are sitting on is dying, and we need something new, and we need to together push through that brick of wall. So that's the way I look at it. If Pfizer did bought the company, but it was maybe a 50, 100, 200 people team, I think we need some of the giants at some point to start to buy that because they need to please their consumer, and that we support this as an industry to say yes, everyone needs to change. I think that's, but we need to look at it as a reset button, not trying to recuperate what we had before. It's more, if we were building advertising today, not without the past, I think we would start with non-private data. We would start with stuff that can accomplish our goals without getting into the private life. It's just that since we gave it away 15 years ago, feels like there's no coming back. But that's why I think we need to hit that reset button. It's a mindset, and I think I could not build the business I have now and be motivated if I didn't have that mindset. And finding that mindset in people, that's what reassures me. A lot of people think like this. Not a lot of people know what to do about it. And I think that's where entrepreneurs and startup can bridge the gap and create opportunities for people to do that.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. I like your comparison also to the vaccine because it's like, the expression of, necessity is the mother of invention. So it's like there's a global pandemic, so it forced this small team, like you said, in Germany, obviously a partner with Pfizer, to build this thing, breaking the rules a little bit along the way, but they could only really do it because of the necessity to do it. So I feel we'd almost need like basically a timestamp saying, as of 2030, no more private data that could be collected. Something that forces an industry change, for instance, kind of like we just saw
Yeah,
with gas powered cars. But yeah, I agree. There needs to be like a
yeah,
big structural change for it to accelerate. Barring that, it's going to come, but it's just going to take time.
yeah. We're on the same page for that, and I'm sure you guys are pushing for that kind of agenda as well.
Yeah, well, Guillaume, I think we could probably riff on this for like another hour. Just want to be respectful of your time. A final question would be: is where can people like find out more about Contextful, the work that you guys are doing, and just connect with you directly?
Yeah, I mean, you can drop me an email. It's Guillaume at contextful.com with no E, but I'm sure that Nectar will be providing all of that info. We're looking to speak with players that are trying to monetize or better measure anything that's mobile programmatic. We're expanding to all Americas and Europe, trying to get leads all over the place there. So any help, any interest, if you're motivated, we're also looking right now for a strong customer success head or manager that could be that has some ad tech experience. But anything, any interest you have with the business, give us a call. I'll talk to you directly and see how we can do business together, and I can help to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Guillaume, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for your time today.
Cool. Take care.